in the Alberta Legislature. My name is David Carter, Speaker of the House and MLA for Calgary-Egmont. After question period today, the members will be discussing two motions. The first is sponsored by the member for Cypress Redcliffe with regard to the mandate of the Public Utilities Board. The second motion is sponsored by the member for Red Deer South, and it deals with the federal parole system. This evening, the House will be meeting from 8 o'clock and will be dealing with Alberta Heritage Saving Trust Fund estimates. Let us pray. O Lord, grant us a daily awareness of the precious gift of life which you have given us. As members of this Legislative Assembly, we dedicate our lives anew to the service of our province and our country. Amen.
Introduction of visitors. Presenting petitions. Reading and receiving petitions. Presenting reports by standing and special committees. Notices of motions.
Member for Edmonton Glengarry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to give oral notice of my intention to move following the completion of routine orders and before orders of the day is called, and pursuant to Standing Order 40, that the Legislative Assembly recognize May 30th to June 3rd as Environment Week in Alberta, declare its opinion that the preservation and restoration of Alberta's natural environment, including clean air and water, is one of the greatest tasks facing the government, and commend those thousands of Albertans who selflessly devote themselves in voluntary effort to the ongoing project of defending the Earth's biosphere and ecology. I have copies for all members.
Introduction of bills. Tabling returns and reports.
Minister of the Environment.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to table three annual reports: the 1986-87 annual report of Alberta Public Safety Services, the 1987 annual report of the Alberta Environmental Research Trust, the 1987 annual report of the Alberta Special Waste Management Corporation. And in addition, Mr. Speaker, earlier today I had the pleasure of being one of the judges in the annual Great Alberta Water Challenge. 5 judges assessed the drinking water quality of 5 Alberta communities, and the winner for the second year in a row, Mr. Speaker, is the city of Calgary. At this time, I would like to offer to you, sir, a sample of the best tasting drinking water in the province of Alberta. Enjoy. And I might add as well, sir, that the honourable member from Highwood has already put in an order for 12 gross.
Introduction of special guests.
Mr. Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to introduce to the House today a grade 6 class from the Duggan Elementary School in the constituency of Edmonton-Whitemud. There are some 59 students visiting with us today. They're in the public gallery. They're accompanied by their teachers Linda Nairn and Arnold Ostfield. I'd ask them to rise and be recognized by the Assembly.
Member for Stettler, followed by Edmonton-Belmont.
Mr. Speaker, it gives me pleasure this afternoon to introduce to you and through you to members of the Assembly 28 grade 6 students from the Gus Wetter School in the town of Castor, my hometown, Mr. Speaker. I'm happy to report that this bright group of young people was able to correctly identify the provincial flower and the provincial bird. They are accompanied by their teachers, Wendy Dunkel and Glenn Goring, by parents Carol Gustafson, Mary Terrell, and Dan Wood, and their bus driver, Mr. Walter Turnbull. I would ask that they rise in the members' gallery and receive the warm welcome of the House.
Member for Edmonton Belmont, followed by Panoka Rimby.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure today to introduce to you and to all members of the Assembly 23 grade 6 students from J.A. Fife Elementary School in the constituency of Edmonton Belmont. They're seated in the public gallery and they're accompanied by their teacher, Mr. Tim Beachy. I would ask that they rise and receive the traditional warm welcome of this Assembly.
Panoka Rimby.
Mr. Speaker, today it's my pleasure to introduce to you and through you to members of the Assembly representatives of the Alberta Home Education Association. Mr. Speaker, they are here today for a meeting relative to Bill 27, the School Act. I wish to introduce Mr. David Stasowicz, President from Edmonton, Mr. David Dickey, Vice President from Wainwright, and Mr. Harold Elias, Executive Member from Calgary. Mr. Speaker, they are seated in the members' gallery, and I would ask that the members of the group stand and we extend the traditional warm welcome of the Assembly.
Member for Taber-Warner.
Mr. Speaker, it's a pleasure to introduce to you and members of the Assembly 3 board members from the Alberta Agriculture Research Institute. These members are in Edmonton today for various meetings. They're in the members' gallery, and I would ask them to rise as they're introduced. Mr. Tom Towers of Red Deer, Mr. David Monroe of Innisfail, and Mr. Don Alton of Del Bonita. Would members join with me in giving them the traditional welcome to our Assembly?
Ministerial statements. Oral question period.
Mr. Speaker, to the Premier. Mr. Speaker, ethanol produced from grain is an important competitor to petroleum-based fuel additives. Mr. Speaker, Alberta farmers tend to gain an important new market for their products if Alberta succeeds at taking advantage of the requirement for cleaner burning fuels into the next decade. Mr. Speaker, the government, as the Premier is well aware, has produced 2 reports on the future of the ethanol industry in Alberta. But as we found out, Mr. Speaker, both reports are technically flawed and they downplay the potential benefits of the industry to our province. My question to the Premier, is the Premier not concerned that the government's negative attitude and approach will cost jobs and investment in Alberta in this industry?
Well, I certainly would agree with the honourable member if the government did have a negative attitude to this industry, Mr. Speaker, or this potential industry. We certainly do not, and the member is right, and it's been a subject of a great deal of discussion in the House already, that 2 reports did have some flaws, and that's why the Minister of Agriculture is continuing his study and investigation of this matter, and that we will be doing an even more comprehensive assessment of the potential for Alberta.
Well, Mr. Speaker, if I may say so to the Premier, time is somewhat of the essence because other jurisdictions are moving ahead, Mr. Speaker. For instance, Premier may be aware that Ethanol Energies, who has been making the main proposals to the government, and it's a Calgary-based company, has apparently signed a deal to build a $112 million U.S. plant in the United States, probably Utah. My question to the Premier, is the Premier not concerned that this Alberta company is going to invest in the USA, creating jobs there and markets for farmers, when this should be being done in Alberta? Is he not concerned about that?
Yeah, Mr. Speaker, I would always want to have the greatest amount of investment in our province, obviously. The assessment that has been made to date shows that there is not an economic way of being able to produce ethanol that can allow it to, even with government assistance, to stand on its own feet. Nevertheless, there are some balancing advantages that we want to assess clearly, and that's what the Minister of Agriculture is doing. I only point out to the honourable member that there are a tremendous number of companies from the United States who are coming to invest in Alberta, and we are pleased with attracting so much industry to our province. Nevertheless, we do not want to lose any as well, and my understanding that the company is still looking at investing in Alberta.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, but the point that we make, and the Premier says it's not economically viable, but it's happening in the United States, it's happening in other parts of the world. They're finding it economically viable, Mr. Speaker. It's happening in Manitoba. This particular company, I'm sure the Premier is aware, is interested in building a grain-based ethanol plant, perhaps in the Vegreville-Lloyd-Minster area. But they say, Mr. Premier, that they have never even received a proper reply to a business plan submitted to the government in September of 1987. Now, Mr. Speaker, in view of the Premier's answers to the question, and in view of the way that there seems to be a problem, would the Premier now personally look into this matter to assure himself that everything possible has been done to secure this very valuable industry for our farmers? Will he take it upon himself personally?
Mr. Speaker, in leading up to the final question, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition made some comments about whether these companies that are investing in other jurisdictions are in fact doing it in an economic way. Our assessment is that they are not, and that they require massive assistance and subsidies. Nevertheless, Mr. Speaker, I am concerned that the honourable member has raised a point. I don't know whether he's heard it directly from the... I would assume, Mr. Speaker, having asked the question, they would give the courtesy of listening to the answer.
No. When have they ever been interested?
And, Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition has said that this company now feels they have never received an adequate reply. Now, that does disturb me, and if the Leader of the Opposition has either a letter or some information that I can follow up on, I certainly will. That comment by itself causes me to give him the commitment that I would certainly check into it personally.
Supplementary question, Mr. Speaker. In terms of money that's been given out by the government, we didn't get loan guarantees with the gainers. We didn't get a lot of other guarantees, and people are wondering why we're so looking for so much security from this particular company. But I take the Premier on his word about the other matter, Mr. Speaker. But my final question would be to the Premier. In view of the seriousness of the matter and in view of the fact that there seems to be a great deal of concern in rural Alberta, and in view of the fact that the Premier said we're now going to study it some more, many people are saying the time for studies is over because the window of opportunity is leaving, will the Premier give his undertaking to this Assembly that he will expedite the development of this industry and cut short the amount of study and move on with it, or give an answer one way or the other quickly?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I felt I just dealt with this matter. I now am not so certain that the Honourable Leader of the Opposition does in fact have any substance behind his comment that the company did not receive an adequate reply. I thought if he has any evidence of that he would provide it to the House, if it is by a letter or some personal comment from that company. If it is in fact interpreting instead something from a news report, I think that's a slightly different matter in terms of accuracy. But nevertheless, I will give the House this commitment that I'm going to look into the matter to make sure that we have adequately assessed it. And if there is something we have missed, we certainly will check into it and see if we can do everything possible to encourage such an investment in our province. I only wanted to point out to honourable members in the House that the government's record of bringing investment to this province is very substantial. There is now something in the order of $14 to $15 billion of investment, either currently underway or about to start in this province. That's probably one of the largest commitments of investment to the future of this province and an illustration of confidence in this province ever before. And we're extremely pleased that Albertans now can see that we've come out of the downturn and that this province is now building again for the future.
Westlock Sturgeon, followed by Stedler.
Our money, Mr. Premier, our money. Supplementary, Mr. Speaker, to the Premier, in view of the fact that the motor that makes ethanol economical in the market is higher quality air, air standards, could the Premier give the House this assurance that he will move and ask his Environment Minister to move to rules that our air standards will be comparable with California and what Canada hopes in the late 1990s as early as possible, thereby making ethanol economical?
Mr. Speaker, one of the problems with such a simplistic approach as the honourable member now proposes would be the potential for putting people out of work and closing down operations that are currently providing investment and jobs for Albertans. And no, I won't give that commitment to him, and I think he probably asked that relatively facetiously. I will give him the commitment, though, that this province is, and this government is growing for the future, that we've turned the economy around, and that we are building this province now on the basis of the strength of the people and the resources being matched with the assistance of this government. And that he is going to see, and he should start to look at the positive side of things for a change, he's going to see one of the greatest periods of growth in the history of Alberta.
Stedler.
Mr. Speaker, a supplementary to the Minister of Economic Development and Trade. I understand that a recent announcement was made by the state of Louisiana, or in the state of Louisiana, that 6 ethanol production plants would be closed down in that state because the state found itself financially unable to continue to support them. I was wondering if the minister could tell us if that result reached really bears out the conclusions that were reached in our government reports.
Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Agriculture and the Premier has confirmed the approach of the government to the potential for the development of a viable ethanol industry in Alberta, and that we are looking and searching out every possible avenue for that to occur. Our examination to date has confirmed that ethanol production cannot be economically viable unless it has a substantial ongoing subsidy, and that's been determined in other jurisdictions. But should there be a breakthrough in terms of additional market opportunities, for example, for the feed or some other byproduct of the production of ethanol, it may be possible for the economics to change. But at this stage, the economics of ethanol production simply do not exist.
Second main question, Leader of the Opposition.
Tell that to Manitoba.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to designate my second question, the member from Calgary Mountain View.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 2 years ago, the Premier gave his personal commitment that small power producers would be connected with all possible haste to the interprovincial electrical grid. More than 3 months have passed since this government received the report of a joint ERCB Public Utility Board inquiry into the viability of this industry. Given that this is one of the most exciting proposals for rural development in Alberta for many years, can the Premier tell us why is it that Albertans are still waiting for a decision from this government on this proposal?
Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Transportation and Utilities has been meeting on a regular basis with the Small Power Producers Association. I personally have talked to a variety of representatives and have continued to encourage them in every way possible. I'd like to see this potential for power production be established in our province. There are some wrinkles in the report that came from the Energy Resources Conservation Board and the Public Utilities Board that presents some problems for them. Nevertheless, the government is working with them to have development by the small power producers as quickly as possible. The honourable member's support is helpful, and I will look forward to seeing it continue to be there should we be able to bring this proposal to fruition.
Mr. Speaker, I was hoping the time for meetings was over and that the time had arrived for decisions to be made. The small power producers have indicated they'll need to receive 6.5 cents per kilowatt hour if their proposal is to be viable. To the Premier, is it the intention of the government to establish this industry in Alberta by setting the rate at or near the level recommended by the producers, or is this government willing to miss out on this industry by setting a rate that's lower than that and making it unviable?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the honourable member has some rates in his mind. I don't know whether he has hit the right one yet. There are a certain level that it appears that would be a base, and anything above that would be surplus to the needs. He should remember, of course, that whatever rate is set, it's going to have to be paid by the users or the taxpayers if it's in some form of a subsidy, or whether they wish to invest the dollars into research and potential development in this area. For my part, I think it might well be a good investment on the behalf of consumers to take some additional dollars at this stage. But the honourable member has to realize that he is suggesting a level and a commitment of dollars that would be put up by the taxpayers or consumers. And we would want to make sure that we don't ask them to carry that load unless we're sure that there is potential benefits.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think what the small power producers would like is a price at the cost equivalent to the cost of a coal-fired plant constructed by the big utilities. Could the Premier confirm, just in terms of the proposal that he's looking at, whether the schedule that they're likely to announce will include a regular rate of increase or an inflation index during the implementation phase, again, in order to get this industry established and off the ground and providing economic development throughout rural Alberta?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the honourable member is now getting into some details, and while they are matters that I have been dealing with more on a detailed basis, the Minister of Transportation and Utilities could reply to the honourable member. I would only say this to him: if it appears that we can move ahead on this, we'll move ahead in a way that makes it happen and hopefully very successfully. But he's now into inflation comments and so on for the future, and I'll ask the Minister of Transportation and Utilities reply to him.
Mr. Speaker, I guess in response to what may in fact be considered, there are three alternatives currently being considered. One is the alternative supported by the Small Power Producers Association, headed by Mr. Oren Hart, and Mr. Hart and Mr. Dale Johnson were in my office as recently as last Thursday, discussing a number of the issues that relate to the proposal and where it might be at. I suggested at that time that we were down to three alternatives, and I would hope that within the period of 3 weeks from that time that we may be able to have something.
Well, Mr. Speaker, apparently one of those proposals has to do with the fact that the big utilities can set themselves up as small power producers to take advantage of the new proposal. I wonder whether the government's proposal will, in the end, allow for that option, or whether they will see it for what it is, as a ludicrous and self-defeating provision, and not proceed any further than beyond the discussion stage with that.
Stand up for the little guy.
Question, additional supplementary, Westlock Sturgeon.
Yes, Mr.
You weren't listening.
This is back to the Premier, Mr. Speaker. Is the government's reluctance to make a decision tied in any way to the possibility that they are thinking of junking EMA, or the equalization of electrical rates all across around the province?
First of all, Mr. Speaker, there's no reluctance to make the decision. The key is to make the right decision, not a fast one. I would only add to that there has been no consideration of junking EMA.
Leader of the Liberal Caucus, main question.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. My main question today is to the Minister of Social Services. Despite noises, Mr. Speaker, in the Department of Social Services a couple of weeks back that Bosco Youth Ranch was coming to the argument was coming to some resolution, the ranch has still not been receiving referrals. Could the minister clarify for the House, Mr. Speaker, whether it is the Edmonton office or the department itself that is blackballing the use of Bosco?
Mr. Speaker, there is nobody blackballing the use of Bosco.
Mr. Speaker, somebody's doing it. You've got empty facilities there. Mr. Speaker, then supplementary, who ultimately makes the decisions on whether Bosco is utilized at all? Is it the Edmonton office or is it the minister?
Mr. Speaker, each region is responsible for seeing that there's facilities to care for the children that would become our responsibility. And so there are 6 regions in the province. 5 regions have the capacity to refer to Bosco because they have not necessarily, in their view, achieved all the facilities that they would sometimes like to have. In the case of the Edmonton region, Mr. Speaker, there is an Edmonton Children's Plan. I'd be happy to provide it to the honourable member, and he will see that there has been a great deal of planning for the past 2 years go into services for children, and that in fact Bosco is not a facility that is needed right now.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, certainly many parents, because many parents would disagree with that and cannot seem to get their young lads that are having problems and others into Bosco, would she be able to tell this House whether she has any input then into the Edmonton office? Are they completely free to do as they like on that?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think it's important to note that the Department of Social Services cannot guarantee the viability of everybody who sets up a facility in this province and advertises their services. And Bosco, I'm sure, has very good services, but the department and each region is charged with the responsibility of having a budget in place and living, for the most part, within the means of that budget. And I believe it is a very responsible action for the Edmonton region to have planned very carefully for those services, Mr. Speaker, and it is not up to them to guarantee the viability of another caregiver who decides to build in the region.
Mr. Speaker, those are just not in accord with the facts. Would the minister be prepared to override the Edmonton office if there are requests directly to her from people wanting to have people in the Bosco facility? Would she override the Edmonton office?
Mr. Speaker, the Edmonton region has its share of professional people who plan very carefully the services delivered to children. And those services have been planned very carefully, Mr. Speaker, and it is unfortunate that not all caregivers in the province have their facilities filled. I can assure the honourable member that many people come forward and say, if you would only just send some of the children to us, we could maintain a viable facility, and it is not always possible.
Edmonton Calder.
Supplementary to the Minister, in view of the fact that the Edmonton region has adopted a philosophy of deinstitutionalization, why has the department not provided adequate community services for these children?
Mr. Speaker, I think the department is moving in the right direction, and as always, we can say that we would like to have more services for children. We've certainly expanded a great deal the in-home services for troubled families and youngsters, but as always, there are times when there'll be waiting lists. The number of services don't necessarily match on a day-to-day basis the number of people who are coming forward.
Member for Little Bow, followed by the member for Cypress Redcliffe, Edmonton Glengarry, Calgary Buffalo.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Minister of Career Development and Employment, and it's with regards to the Alberta Business and Community Development Program, in short ABCD. My concern is with regards to the grants to various private businesses going out on what I consider a rather ad hoc basis, and also maybe contrary to the program guidelines. And I cite as the examples the Pyramid Lake Bungalows, the Wilderness Village, and the Tall Cree Indian Band. My first question to the Minister, Mr. Speaker, is could the Minister confirm that these grant recipients are all private organizations engaged in private business?
Mr. Speaker, if the question is whether all grant recipients under ABCD are private organizations, the answer is no. As the title indicates, it's Alberta Business and Community Development.
Mr. Speaker, a supplementary question to the Minister. Could the Minister indicate why in the guidelines under B, section K, it says proposals cannot be of a direct profit-making nature. But in some of the grants provided so far, the examples cited, they are profit-making private enterprises. Could the minister indicate the contradiction in the guidelines and the allocation of funds?
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased that the honourable members brought it to my attention, and I'll look into it and report back to him.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary to the minister, could the minister indicate to the Assembly whether, in terms of universality of the grants available through this program, that all small businesses across the province would qualify if they're in stages of expansion and providing a broader community benefit as outlined by the guidelines?
Mr. Speaker, the Alberta Business and Community Development Program, I believe, if my memory serves me correctly, has a $7.3 million budget for 88-89, and we estimate that there will be some between 1,500 and 2,000 jobs created as a result of that budget. The program is designed to fund the construction, the labor side of any construction project. That is to stimulate employment and to keep the tradespeople busy during a period in the past of economic stagnation. So it's designed to fund the labor component. In terms of the guidelines, I would say that everything else being equal, that the individuals that the member brings forward would qualify under this program.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary for clarification. In my town of Vulcan, a store owner, hardware store and grocery store, Bill Yee, has just expanded his business, and very well. And using that as an example to the minister, could the minister indicate that small businesses such as that would qualify under this program for grants?
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
Calgary Buffalo supplementary.
Yes, I'm wondering whether the minister could clarify the decision-making process in what appears to be a rather arbitrary program, which is perhaps subject to abuse. Does the minister personally approve all applications, for example?
No, Mr. Speaker.
Main question, Cypress Redcliffe, followed by Edmonton Glengarry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question today is to the Minister of Energy. I understand the minister has met with his federal counterpart today, and I wonder if he can inform the Assembly if there is any new news on Oslo or the other 6 lease operators in the Fort McMurray area regarding the expansion or development of those leases.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm begin by indicating how pleased we are with the activity in the heavy oil and the oil sands area since world oil prices have begun to recover, with over $1 billion worth of projects in the last year and a half in that area. We also, Mr. Speaker, invited proposals from the private sector, and Oslo was one of the ones that came forth. And I met with my federal counterpart last Friday and again on Monday of this week, where we discussed federal provincial participation in the project. And Monday we left with the federal minister a proposal that he will take to his colleagues, and the discussions will continue further after their analysis.
Supplementary question. I wonder if the minister can share with us any details of the discussion, and especially are we in a position that we're getting roughly the same amount developing heavy oil as what the announcement was relating to offshore oil off of Hibernia?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm not going to get into the details of how governments would participate in the project, other than that standing alone at today's prices, the project is uneconomic. However, with prices in the low $20 US, the project would become an economic one. And it's our expectation that prices would certainly be in that range by the time this would come on stream. It's a $4.1 billion project for production of 75,000 barrels of oil per day. It creates over 15,000 jobs, 9,000 during the construction period as direct and indirect jobs, and certainly would add significantly to the economy not only of this province but other parts of the country as well.
Mr. Speaker, I wonder if the Minister could inform the Assembly how security of supply or future supply and market would affect this, especially operations going along with free trade.
Well, as all honourable members know, Mr. Speaker, the United States is running out of oil supplies and will be more and more dependent upon other sources. And we, as a neighbor of the United States, with the potential that we have, we think that the U.S. looks very good in the future, and certainly the free trade agreement will be very helpful in that regard in terms of access to those markets and also in terms of Americans investing in this country for future supplies. The potential of our oil sands, with reserves greater than the reserves of the entire Middle East, the United States can't help but look to this part of the world as to depend upon future supplies.
Final supplementary, Mr. Speaker, and being as the member from Vegreville wanted me to ask this part of the question, I wonder if the Minister can update us if there is any discussion related to the Lloydminster refinery.
So, Mr. Speaker, we have an agreement with the federal government and Saskatchewan and Husky relative to the bi-provincial upgrader in Lloydminster. We made the announcement some weeks ago, which would certainly have significant economic benefits for that part of the province as well as for this area. And it is now up to Husky to find a private sector partner, and Husky are meeting with the potential partners, and my expectation is that we'll have construction underway before the end of the year.
To Calgary Forest Lawn, followed by Westlock Sturgeon.
Mr. Speaker, to the Minister of Energy, will the Minister now give us his commitment that all of the heavy oil produced at the Oslo project will be refined here in Alberta?
Complete here in Alberta.
Mr. Speaker, this is a new twist to the Oslo project. The Oslo project is a mining, extraction, and upgrading process. All three processes built into one. We end up with a light synthetic crude oil, which is very marketable. And we have refineries in this province, and our pipelines are taking crude oil to refineries elsewhere as well. We feel that we want as much upgrading as possible in this province, and that's why we're very pleased with the upgrading aspect related to that. We have other proposals before us right now that are in the area of having upgrading facilities attached to refineries. And certainly, the more we can add value to our products in this province in the future, the happier we'll be.
Westlock Sturgeon.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. It's back to the Minister, the original thing on Oslo and the environmental effects. Could the Minister enlighten the House as to whether the methods used in Oslo will result in the huge tailing pounds of sodium hydroxide, and also how many tons of sulfur each day will be put into the air from the plant, proposed plant?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the honourable member may want to put on the order paper some of those questions. In terms of the development of Oslo, Oslo are working very closely with AOSTRA and the Department of Environment relative to how we can improve the technologies for that project to reduce the environmental impact. It may be possible, and the honourable member raised this question the other day in the House, I believe, relative to how we can improve the situation with the tailings pond. And some of the technologies that have been discussed are such that there would be no requirement for a tailings pond. I'm not aware of the technology to the degree that I'd be able to answer the question definitively right now whether one is or not required.
Edmonton, Glengarry, followed by Calgary Buffalo, Vermilion Viking, Edmonton Calder.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Minister of Forestry, Lands and Wildlife has indicated that many foreign firms are lined up to exploit our forest resources, perhaps even more than we have forests for. This may bode well for a government intent on creating a forestry boom just before an election, but it causes great concern for small producers, especially native companies trying to deal with native venture capital corporation. So I'd like to ask the Minister about some protection for these small producers. Will the Minister consider, for instance, preventing large FMA holders from having concurrent access to additional timber quotas so that small producers can access more timber?
Mr. Speaker, our government's view has always been to look at the long-term in forestry projects. It isn't something short-term we're looking at all. And the small operators, the small independent operators, as well as the large companies, it's a good intermix, and that's what we want to see. In all forestry projects, we want to see them as diversified as possible. And it certainly helps take the swings out of the marketplace when we have that diversification, and the small operator plays a very major role in that piece.
And they're very much afraid they're going to be squeezed right out of the mix. Considering the difficulty the small operators have getting secure tenure to lumber, and especially the problems native-owned companies have getting money from Native Venture Capital Corporation for forestry operations, will the Minister consider, for any area where FMAs are being granted, that 25% of the available timber in that area be excluded from FMAs for use by small producers?
Mr. Speaker, within some of the FMAs, there are quota holders now, and with respect to anything that we can do to work with small operators, I meet with them on an ongoing basis, and with the Alberta Forest Products Association, and certainly we want to do all that we can to see that they're enhanced and that their position in the future is secure.
Thank you. I was speaking specifically of long-term tenure to give them some security. As a result of the contentious and rejected bid for 4 timber quotas by Erith, Ty, and Edson, is the Minister planning a thorough review and revamping of the tender and bidding process to prevent political interference and favoritism?
Mr. Speaker, I have been working on an ongoing review of that particular quota sale. I asked the Alberta Forest Products Association to give me their advice, the advice of them and their members, which includes both large and small operators, and I'm reviewing that advice now. I believe there's some urgency to move forward fairly quickly with doing something in that particular area. I've been working very closely with the MLA who represents that area to see that we can see a project go forward in the Edson area. And, Mr. Speaker, we're moving with all due haste to try and accomplish that fact.
Part of the problem was too close a contact, I think. Considering that newer technological standards are making it difficult for some smaller operators, is the Minister considering a program of technical and financial assistance to small timber operators to help them upgrade technologically and compete with larger multinational operators upon whom this government practically forces unconditional money?
Well, with respect to his last comment, that's absolute nonsense. To make a statement like that's absolutely foolish. And our government always works with small business and small operators through the Department of Economic Development and my own to be helpful to them. But am I considering any special and unique program right now? The answer is no, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Westlock Sturgeon, supplementary.
Speaker, to the Minister, has the Minister fixed in his mind, referring to the Edson Ty area, or turned down Ty area, whether or not, first of all, whether he's going to use competitive bidding, and secondly, is there a deadline that we're working towards?
Mr. Speaker, with respect to competitive bidding, that is an option. There are probably 2 or 3 ways that could be approached. And I've been working with the MLA and to come out with something that would be I believe, competitive for the area, and try and maximize the not only the project that's there, but the value adding that may take place. So I'm working on that with all due haste, Mr. Speaker.
Calgary Buffalo, followed by Vermilion Viking, Edmonton Calder.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the Minister of Energy, we all favor development of our tar sands and heavy oil resources, but many Albertans can't understand why hundreds of millions and perhaps billions of our dollars are being used to assist large oil and gas companies, and mainly foreign ones, so that they can develop mega projects which are clearly uneconomic in order to export oil to the United States. Now, last month it was the Husky upgrader, and now we hear about the government proposing special deals for Oslo and perhaps the Syncrude expansion. And to the Minister of Energy, can the Minister tell us where we're ready to spend such huge sums in terms of grants, loans, and special royalty and tax breaks to push projects such as Oslo and the upgrader, which he admits are uneconomic and which oil companies won't tackle without our help? What happened to free market decision making?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm assuming from what the honourable member is saying that if he had his way, he would see these projects not begin and possibly many years down the road, and thus lose the jobs and the activities in this province. Mr. Speaker, we are not going to see that happen. We're going to see these projects go ahead. We're going to invest our money in the future of the oil sands and the heavy oils, Mr. Speaker. It is not money given to the large oil companies, money invested. We're prepared as a government to share some of the downside risk, but at the same time get in on the upside gains. So all of these projects are negotiated on the basis of sharing these risks, and then when world oil prices rise, provincial government would more than get back a fair rate of return when the world prices reach a level where the projects are profitable.
Well, it really looks like we're taking risks which the oil companies won't take and which could cost us dearly, and I'm wondering whether the Minister could tell us why, since these mega projects are really geared to exporting oil to the United States, which is the main beneficiary, why don't we make a deal with the United States end users in order to have them finance the mega projects in return for guaranteed supplies? Has the Minister discussed that possibility?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm not sure the honourable member understands the situation relative to how these projects proceed. First of all, the main beneficiaries to development are Canadians and Albertans. These projects, in going ahead, are developing or creating jobs in this province and creating jobs in other parts of the country. I mentioned just a few minutes ago, for example, the Oslo project. Some 15,000 jobs created by that project, 9,000 in construction. Demands upon our engineering professions in this province and also on construction trades. Mr. Speaker, as I indicated in my answer to the first question, we are going to see these projects go ahead, create the jobs and the economic activity, help our country in the balance of trade payments when further productions come on stream. It certainly adds to our future supplies of energy in the future. And Americans are investing in oil developments in this country. And with the free trade agreement in place, we expect to see more investment coming from that part of the world.
We all want jobs, but we're concerned that they're based on wishful thinking and perhaps madman economics. And I'm wondering whether the Minister can assure Albertans that we will get a full piece of the equity for any help that we give to the Oslo project and not provide a sweetheart deal as we did with the Husky upgrader, and we took half the risk and got merely leftovers for our share of the return.
Well, again, Mr. Speaker, the honourable member either hasn't looked at the details of the Husky agreement or he doesn't want to understand it. As I indicated previously, we are prepared to work with the private sector in sharing the downside risk, but I assure the honourable member and other members in this House that we are also going to be part of the upside gain in these projects. So there will be no sweetheart deals. They will be deals where we will create jobs, and also the taxpayers of this province will receive a significant rate of return on an investment in the future.
Well, no, I haven't looked at the deal because we can't get a copy. What we've told us indicates.
Supplementary question, Calgary.
To the Premier, Mr. Speaker, the Premier stated last month that Alberta is prepared to go it alone in order to make the Husky upgrader work, and I'm wondering whether this is still the government's position, and does this mean that we're prepared to establish our own mini Petrocan in this for this project?
Actually, Mr. Speaker, the honourable member, I wouldn't mind if he quoted me, but I would wish he would quote me accurately. What I said last month was that the government of Alberta would be willing to invest in an equity participation in the upgrader in Lloydminster because we think it's an excellent opportunity to invest in the future of Alberta's resources. I take it from the honourable member's questions today that we can tell the people of both Lloydminster and Fort McMurray, as far as the Liberal Party is concerned, they will not support the projects in either of those communities.
Vegreville.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like the Premier to explain how, when they talk about giving millions of dollars of taxpayers' money to oil mega projects, they use words like development incentives and downside risk, and yet when they consider giving some public participation to an important agricultural industry like ethanol, they use words like subsidy.
That's right.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the honourable member might want to draw that illusion, but that's not so at all. And as a matter of fact, if we can find a way by either guarantee or equity participation to support the ethanol industry, we would. The fact of the matter is even with the assistance, there are no economics. And so the honourable member, unfortunately, is trying to draw a comparison that just doesn't stand up.
Talking about nationalization. Vermilion Viking, followed by Edmonton Calder if there's time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the Minister of Environment, there's a real concern in Alberta today with the devastation of our trees with the severe outbreaks of the tent caterpillar, both this year and other years. The only practical control of these has been the use of chemicals by ground or aerial application. Can the Minister advise us what role the Department is playing in order to facilitate the public in the control of this pest today?
Mr. Speaker, Agriculture Canada approves for usage in this country certain chemicals, and what Alberta Environment does is basically enforces the usage of those chemicals within the province of Alberta, and as well provides the licenses and permits pursuant to that federal statute.
Well, there's a little confusion going on. Would the Minister indicate why the provincial pesticide chemical branch has issued a letter to those licensees, aerial applicators, and other people in the province stating a limited usage of malathion, diazinon, or 7 as to their label restrictions? Could you indicate why they did that?
Mr. Speaker, in the early part of May of this year, Agriculture Canada informed us that there were 3 particular chemicals that could not be used for aerial spraying in the province of Alberta, for that matter the country Canada. The 3 were malathion, carbaryl, and diazinon. They are not permitted for aerial spraying. They can be permitted, however, for local spraying from the ground. And by aerial spraying, that means loading them in an aircraft and spraying large quadrants of the province of Alberta, particularly in residential areas.
Well, there's some taking issue with the fact that it's not stated specifically. It says that it's just not to be used around residents. And the insinuation says that the federal government is not making a relabeling restriction on the chemical companies, but only saying where those labels do not indicate use around residents, they can't be used. Could the Minister say whether he's going to have that clarified with the federal government?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, Alberta Environment's been in contact with Agriculture Canada for clarification of that, but the utilization of the information on labels clearly indicates that aerial spraying in residential areas is not to be permitted, and at that position Alberta Environment has issued a recent notice to all applicators in the province.
Time for question period has expired. Might we have unanimous consent to complete this series of questions? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Vermilion Viking, one final supplementary.
Well, could you then point out to the public of Alberta and make a statement that it's safer to use ground application than it would be aerial application?
Well, Mr. Speaker, that information has been provided in recent weeks. It's been provided, in the last 2 years, certainly since I've been the Minister of the Environment, in terms of the reduction in the usage of chemicals that we have in the province of Alberta. But I will take under advice and advisement the suggestion by the honourable member that we should do more in order to communicate that message to the people of Alberta, and would do so by way of a public statement.
Thank you. Edmonton Glengarry.
Thank you. The Minister has expressed his preference to me for Bacillus thuringiensis over malathion. I'm wondering if he's planning this year to do any experimental applications to test its effectiveness on all sizes of the tentworm caterpillar.
Well, Mr. Speaker, that's underway. In addition to that, there are a number of chemicals that can safely be used for aerial spraying in the province of Alberta, including Dipel 132, Dipel 88, and Thuricide. They're all chemicals that are able to be used in the control of 10 caterpillars in our province.
Any additional supplementaries? There are a number of issues to be dealt with with regard to the operation of the House. The first, the Chair recognized the Minister of the Environment with regard to some information given to the House earlier today.
Well, Mr. Speaker, earlier today I presented to you a sample of water as a result of the winner of the Great Alberta Water Challenge in 1988, and I inadvertently, because I have it etched in the back of my mind that Calgary should win something sometime, indicated that Calgary had won.
Wait, just a minute. Let's get to the main issue.
Well, Mr. Speaker, what I was trying to point out is I would wish that Calgary would win something. Unfortunately, Calgary is not the winner in 1988. The winner in both 1987 and 1988 is the city of Lethbridge, and I want to convey my apologies to the mayor of Lethbridge and the two MLAs from Lethbridge, and I sincerely hope that Mayor Klein has not in the last 50 minutes gone out and printed a whole bunch of signs.
No.
PA system. I didn't hear that. Could the Honourable Minister repeat the city?
Chair recognizes Edmonton Highlands with respect to an issue yesterday.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday in oral question period, while I was discussing the matter of inner-city housing with the minister responsible, that is the Solicitor General, I said that I had sent him a letter. In fact, I checked my records this morning, Mr. Speaker, and it turns out that the letter that I had sent some months ago was to the Minister of Community and Occupational Health, so the minister was indeed correct. Thank you.
Chair wishes to point out to the House that last evening an exchange took place whereby one of the members in the House made a comment with regard to provincial judges, and that on an examination of the Blues, it is a borderline comment which could be seen to be as casting some degree of criticism with regard to provincial judges. The Chair, therefore, would remind all members of the House that such comments are indeed totally out of order, totally uncalled for, and that the relevant sections in Beauchesne are 321, subsection 1. All references to judges and courts of justice of the nature of personal attack and censure have always been considered unparliamentary, and the Speaker has always treated them as breaches of order. And again in Beauchesne 316, a member while speaking must not, subsection H, cast reflections upon the conduct of judges of superior courts unless such conduct is based upon a substantive motion. Last evening in the Chair, the Deputy Speaker called the member for Athabasca-Lac-La-Biche to order for some comments. The Blues have been examined. The House takes this as being sufficient. Chair takes this as being sufficient warning to all quarters of the House, and it's certain that all members will indeed keep themselves from further comments or aspersions in that regard. Chair now recognizes the member for Edmonton Glengarry with respect to a request for unanimous consent under Standing Order 40.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Under Standing Order 40, move the motion, be it resolved that the Legislative Assembly recognize May 30th to June 3rd as Environment Week in Alberta, declare its opinion that the preservation and restoration of Alberta's natural environment, including clean air and water, is one of the greatest tasks facing government, and commend those thousands of Albertans who selflessly devote themselves in voluntary effort to the ongoing project of defending the Earth's biosphere and ecology. I believe that the motion speaks for itself, and instead of taking an undue amount of time of the Assembly, would merely request the support of all members of all parties.
There's a request for unanimous consent under Standing Order 40. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, please say no. Motion carries unanimously. Edmonton Glengarry speaking to the motion or call for the question. Order, please. There's a call for the question. All those in favor of the motion as proposed by Edmonton Glengarry, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, please say no.